Well, it's 2 after 6. I want to be respectful of everyone's time tonight. So welcome tonight to the Modesto-Turlock Management Zone meeting hosted by the Valley Water Collaborative. I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of Valley Water Collaborative, and we have a presentation tonight for all of you that'll cover the activities that we've been involved with over the last few months in preparation for the management zone. We'll have a couple of speakers in addition to myself. We'll have Richard Meyerhoff with GI Consultants and Barbara Delgish with Ludar Scalmanini. Barbara, my apologies on your last name. And we are also having a translation function available to those who are interested. So on the next slide, I'm going to have an explanation of the steps that you need to take to click on the Spanish interpretation.
Muy buenas noches a todos. Si alguien solicita interpretación esta noche, tenemos interpretación simultánea ocurriendo. Para accesar la interpretación, simplemente van a ir al icono que parece un mundo. Seleccionando el mundo van a poder ver que hay lenguajes. Van a seleccionar español y pueden optar también por poner en silencio su audio original. Si ustedes están llamándonos o usando un teléfono para accesar la aplicación de Zoom, solamente necesitan oprimir los 3 botones que va a decir More, queriendo decir más opciones. Allí les va a dar la opción para interpretación del lenguaje y una vez más van a buscar el español y de esa manera vamos a poder servirles. Cualquier pregunta o comentario que tengan lo pueden hacer en su propio lenguaje. Gracias.
And thank you. And in the next slide, we're going to have Lydia explain some of the guidelines for today's Zoom meeting to enable you to participate and ask questions throughout the presentation. So Lydia.
Thank you, Perry. Good evening, everybody. So just to cover a few guidelines before we get into the main portion of the meeting, a few things to cover here. If you're shown as a participant and you're reflected as a phone number instead of a name, we ask that you we use the chat icon and send me a message with your actual name so that I can update your information and we can accurately capture who is attending the webinar today. As an attendee of the webinar, you are automatically muted. If you see a need to be unmuted, you can go ahead and send me a message in the chat and I'll see what I can do. We will stop in the presentation in 2 places for questions to be answered. Please use the Q&A icon to type in your questions and we'll be answering them not only in English, but in Spanish as well. And if you need to type in your question in Spanish, that's okay. We'll be able to respond to your question, not a problem. Just as a reminder, we are not using the raise your hand function during this meeting. We will also have 3 places during the presentation where we will launch a poll, first in English and then in Spanish. We will pause after each poll is launched and give the participants a chance to respond, and then we will share the results of that poll before moving on to the next poll series of questions. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat function and one of the panelists will see what we can do in order to provide support. Thank you.
Thank you, Lydia. All right, on the next slide, I'll go over briefly what our meeting agenda is for this evening. We're going to cover the meeting purpose and talk about who this organization is, Valley Water Collaborative, and why we're here. Then we also have a review with some maps and information about the nitrate conditions in the Turlock and Modesto basins. And then we've begun some of the preliminary write-ups on the early action plan that will include drinking water solutions and explain a little bit more of what that early action plan is. And lastly, I want to give you opportunities and direction on how you can participate in this process that is going to be stretching out, especially in the next few months, but over the years as this program goes from the planning stage to the implementation stage. So next slide. So Valley Water Collaborative is a new organization formed this past summer by a number of entities in the Modesto and Turlock to implement the nitrate management zones. This is a new regulatory requirement of the Regional Water Board. And we're going to be working collectively with our members and with other community groups to try to improve the water quality in the basins, especially it's related to nitrates in groundwater for both now and in the future. And as part of this meeting theme is we want to reach out to the local communities to ensure they understand what we're working on and a partner where there's a willingness to do so. And our mission for our organization, as you see highlighted there, is we're going to implement these programs to provide access to safe drinking water for residents who may have wells that are contaminated with nitrates. And then a long-term goal is to protect and enhance the quality of groundwater used for drinking water in our region. So new organization that we are. On the next slide, you'll see our home page of our website. We're all set up. We have a place where you can read more about Valley Water Collaborative, our board members, our mission and other activities, and also sign up for either the stakeholder group or the community group. Many of you that are on have already done so, but if you know of others that may be interested in tracking our activities over the month, we encourage them to go sign up, and then we can make sure they're on the list where we distribute the draft documents, provide information on the program status as we develop our implementation plan. So on the next slide, I'm going to talk about something else that we're working on and would like interest in, hopefully can gain interest in, is our organization is set up to have subcommittees or committees, if you will, in the Modesto and Turlock basins. So we're looking for volunteers who are willing to participate in these committees that will be initially helping develop the plans. And then once those are submitted to the water board and in return for changes or otherwise, helping us implement the program as it rolls out next summer and fall of 2021. And these committees are going to play an important role guiding the board of directors in helping giving input on the budgets that we have to create and implement in the area, and also help facilitate the local outreach that's going to be really important. And then ultimately what this program is set up for is delivering water and providing safe drinking water to residents in the two regions. So next in the next slide, we're going to talk about what is the issue with nitrates in groundwater, and we'll hand it over to Barbara.
Next slide, please. So thanks, Perry. As you just mentioned, my name is Barb Dalgish. I'm a senior hydrogeologist at Ludorf and Scalmanini Consulting Engineers, and I've been doing the technical work associated with the groundwater quality assessment and nitrate characterization for the Modesto and Turlock management zones. All of this work is a key element to completing both the preliminary management zone proposal and the early action plan documents that are the first submittals due to the regional board for the nitrate control plan, and they're due on March 8th. I'll be going over what we know about nitrate conditions in these two management zone areas and how these conditions might affect you. Next slide, please. So let's jump right in and find out what we know about nitrate conditions in the Modesto and Turlock management zones. Well, in order to do that, we had to do a bunch of research. We collected as much groundwater nitrate data as we could get our hands on. We tapped into public databases and requested nitrate data from any well records that the various counties and water districts might have and were willing to share with us, and put them all together into one big nitrate database. Now, since we're most concerned with the nitrate conditions that exist in privately owned domestic wells, and these wells are typically drilled to depths that aren't as deep as, say, municipal supply wells that cities use, or even some of the bigger agricultural wells used for irrigation, we had to categorize the nitrate data by well depth. So that way we can focus on nitrate conditions that will potentially impact people relying on private domestic wells. We also wanted to focus our study on the most recent time period possible. so that we can get the best idea of what groundwater conditions are like today. So once we had our data set of recent upper zone wells, we made a map of current nitrate conditions from the zone where your domestic well most likely draws its water. Next slide, please. So this is the map that shows what we know about nitrate conditions across both management zones. The Modesto management zone is on top and the Turlock management zone is to the south, separated by the thick black line. This map shows you the actual well data used for the analysis. These are the colorful circles and triangles on the map. The circles are used to show you what wells from our collected data set that are located within the Modesto and Turlock management zones, and the triangles are used to help us estimate what conditions are like near the borders of the management zones. So you can see that there are some blank spots within the black bordered management zones. These hatched areas didn't have any nitrate data that could give us a clue as to what the nitrate conditions are, and they were too far away from other wells where we did have data to make an educated guess. So we call these areas gap areas, where the nitrate conditions are unknown. Luckily, our map has only a small portion of these gap areas, and the rest of the map area is filled with shaded colors from green to red. These shaded colors indicate ambient nitrate conditions in the upper zone, where most domestic wells get their water from. The greens and yellow shaded areas indicate areas with low or safe and healthy nitrate levels. The orange shaded areas indicate areas with nitrate conditions that are getting closer to being unsafe. So they haven't exceeded the safe drinking water standard, but they are considered to have elevated nitrate levels. Lastly are the red shaded areas, which indicate areas where nitrate conditions are likely unsafe for drinking because the nitrate level is too high and above the safe drinking water standard of 10 milligrams per liter as nitrogen. Those areas are mostly located on the western sides of both management zones. Next slide, please. So now that we know what the nitrate conditions look like across our area, we need to figure out how these conditions might affect you. So the first question we have to ask is, where do you get your drinking water from? Do you have a privately owned domestic well that supplies drinking water to your house? Or do you maybe pay a water bill to a public water system like the city of Modesto or the city of Turlock or someone else? If you pay a water bill, then you likely are already getting water through your pipes that is safe to drink. For those of us who get our drinking water from private domestic wells, those wells are likely not treated to make sure that the water we drink is safe. So our next step is to help find out if your drinking water comes from an area with elevated nitrate. We do this by identifying private domestic wells and estimating the population of residents that are in potentially elevated nitrate areas. Next slide, please. So here is the map that shows the locations of all of the domestic wells known to the state of California using their records of well completion reports. The black dots indicate domestic wells. This map also outlines public water systems. So these areas are outlined in purple with black hatching. You can see the city of Modesto in the north, Ceres below it, Keys and Turlock running south along Highway 99, as well as other public water systems in the area outlined in purple. Below the black dots and purple outlines is the same map that we saw earlier, showing the estimated nitrate conditions in groundwater. Again, the red and orange shaded areas indicate areas with elevated nitrate, where the groundwater is potentially unsafe to drink. And the yellow and green areas indicate areas with lower nitrate levels that would be safe to drink. Next slide, please. So this slide zooms in on the Modesto management zone, or the northern half of the map we just saw. Using the map, we can identify the number of domestic wells and the population of residents that occur outside of public water systems, but are also located within orange and red shaded areas. Almost 1/3, or 32% of all domestic wells in the Modesto management zone are located outside of known public water system boundaries and may have elevated nitrate conditions. When we break this down, we see that about 190 domestic wells occur within the orange areas, where nitrate levels have not exceeded the safe drinking water standard, but are getting close. We also see that there are about 350 domestic wells that are located in the red shaded areas, which indicates unsafe nitrate conditions. So a total of 540 domestic wells, according to the state of California's well completion report database, make up the 32% mentioned at the top of the screen that may have elevated nitrate conditions in them. In terms of population, using the 2010 US Census data, we estimate that up to 7,200 people, or about 2% of the entire Modesto Management Zone population, obtain drinking water from domestic wells impacted by elevated nitrate. Next slide, please. Thanks. This slide shows similar information, except now we're zooming in on the Turlock Management Zone, or the southern half of the map we saw earlier. For the Turlock Management Zone, about 2/3 or 63% of all domestic wells outside of known public water system boundaries may have elevated nitrate conditions. When we break that number down, it translates to about 450 domestic wells located in orange shaded areas, which represented the elevated nitrate conditions, but not exceeding the drinking water standard, and about 1,700 domestic wells in the red shaded areas. So this makes up a total of about 2,150 domestic wells that may have elevated nitrate conditions in the Turlock Management Zone. And when we look at the 2010 census data for the population of people in these elevated nitrate areas, we estimate that up to 48,000 people, or 24%, almost a quarter of the total Turlock Management Zone population, might be relying on drinking water from domestic wells impacted by elevated nitrate. So now we want to hear from you. We're going to have a poll in a minute that we would appreciate your participation. And also, if you have any questions about the material I just presented or any material presented up to this point, please type your question in the Q&A box and we will go through them following the poll. Next slide, please. Thanks.
So a reminder to everyone, if you wouldn't mind going back one slide to the poll slide, please. As a reminder, we are going to launch the first set of poll questions in English first and give participants a chance to respond in English. We will then share the results of that poll before moving on to the same set of questions presented in Spanish. And then we will give folks a chance to respond that need to in Spanish. And then we will share the results of that poll. We ask that you only respond to the poll questions once, either in English or in Spanish, so that we can get an accurate count in terms of response. Here is the first set of poll questions in English. In order to select a response, you select the response that you would like to present by clicking on the response under question 1 or question 2. A few seconds more here for folks to respond to the first set of poll questions in English. Okay, I will be ending the polling for the questions in English and sharing the results. And now I will be launching the same polling questions in Spanish. A few seconds more for folks to respond to the same set of polling questions in Spanish. Okay, and I'm going to be ending the polling and sharing the results. And that concludes our first set of polling questions. Next slide, please.
Well, thanks everybody for responding. Any questions? If you would put them in the Q&A, type them in, and not seeing any now, and we'll have another couple of opportunities. So I think we'll just keep moving on and go to the next slide.
All right. This is Richard Meyerhoff with GEI Consultants, working with the Valley Water Collaborative on various aspects of the management zone development. So we'll talk briefly in this section about drinking water solutions. As you've heard about the nitrate concerns in groundwater from the presentation that Barbara just gave a moment ago, now we'll talk about how the management zone will be working through the development of an early action plan to address those concerns in the short term. So next slide, please. So the early action plan is literally what it says, is what kind of actions will be done at the beginning of the implementation of the management zone to address the immediate concerns of residents who may not have access to safe drinking water because of elevated nitrate. The early action plan itself will identify the specific actions that will be taken, as well as a schedule for the implementation of those actions. Next slide. What goes into an early action plan is defined by the nitrate control program that's being implemented through the management zone. There are 4 key parts as shown in the pie diagram in the middle. One is to work with you. That's one reason we're having a meeting this evening, and we'll continue to have meetings in the future, is to work with you on the development of what goes into the early action plan, as well as the identification of solutions as we go forward. In the bottom left is just highlighted there with the red circle. A key component of the early action plan is to identify what are the specific actions that will be taken to provide opportunity for residents to have access to alternative water or replacement water during the implementation of the program. And then the other items are kind of typical things that go in the plans to make sure that we're coordinating with others in the management zone who have interests in drinking water concerns, as well as a schedule. Next slide. So what we're going to describe here in just a very few slides are the kinds of things we're considering right now. We're actually in the process of getting ready to start writing a draft of the plan, and we'll be bringing that back to you later in the process, and we'll talk about a schedule at the end, but roughly the end of January, early February, we'll come back to you and actually show you what we're contemplating as the early action plan for this area, and you'll have a chance to comment on that. So we're looking at a 2-tiered program. One is to have what we call water fill stations located at specific areas within the management zones, targeting those areas that have been identified as most likely to have elevated nitrate. And therefore, those residents are probably the most likely to have concern about nitrate in their water. These would be systems that you can drive up to and obtain water at no cost. Then for situations where there are residents who cannot access a fill station, we'll have an alternative program built into the overall early action plan to provide other options. Next slide. So a fill station, people are starting to become more familiar with these. You may see them in a grocery store sometimes. There will be fill stations, but these are similar in that, except that they will be outdoors. They will be structured like we see an example here, which one that was recently opened down in the Kings River subbasin. And they are essentially vending machines that can be operated at no cost to the user. Bring the bottles of different sizes, up to 5 gallons. You may bring as many as you want. You may visit as frequently as you want. You know that the water is safe because the fill station is connected to a water supply that does meet all safe drinking water regulations, and especially for nitrate. Next slide. As indicated, there may be some people who just cannot access a fill station for whatever reason. And so the program is looking at how to build in alternatives. 2 that we're discussing right now is a bottled water delivery program where a vendor would come to your residence under an agreement and bring you a certain amount of water every month for you that meets the needs of your household. Another option is what we call point of use treatment, is where a vendor again comes to your home and installs a treatment device underneath a sink in your home. That treatment device is connected to the water supply that comes into the home, treats it for the nitrate, and you have a faucet specifically connected to that device that provides you safe water then for drinking and cooking. An example of a type of system that might be set up in a home is pictured on the right half of the screen. In either case, the resident would work with the management zone and with the vendors to secure the services for their home. Next slide. So we'll stop here again and have a few polling questions. I'll turn it back to Lydia.
Okay, we'll be launching the next set of polling questions, first in English. Just a few seconds more here for folks to respond. Okay, I'll be ending the polling and sharing the results. And now moving on to the same poll in Spanish. A few seconds more here for attendees to respond. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And that concludes our second set of polling questions. Next slide, please.
I muted myself. One more aspect to mention in the early action plan is the development of a program for well testing. And one thing we're considering is that for residents to request the opportunity to have, for example, a point of use system or a water delivery to their homes, that we make sure that they actually have a well that has nitrate that exceeds the what is considered safe to drink. To make sure that's done in a proper way, the management zone would actually send someone to your home at no cost to you and sample your well to determine what the levels of nitrate are. Also, in the long term, as the management zone continues to develop over many years, there will be increased opportunities for residential well testing moving forward. Next slide, please. So with regards to early action plan, I've just hit the highlights at this point. We will be preparing the early action plan over the next month or so, and we will then provide an opportunity, as we indicated, for residents to participate in reviewing and commenting on the poll. And we will actually have a community outreach meeting like this, again, about early February, to talk with you about what's in the proposed early action plan. We would encourage you to continue to register at the Valley Water Collaborative website to receive any program notifications, including meetings like this. Tell others, your neighbors, encourage them to register. And the early action plan is just the beginning. Once we begin implementing the program, approximately about May of 2021, there will be continued community outreach meetings like this to keep you apprised of the status of the program and to continue to get your input on implementation. And next slide. Turn it back to you, Lydia.
Okay, I'll be launching the next set of polling questions. First in English. Few minutes more for participants to respond to the poll in English. Okay, I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And now I'll be sharing the same poll, but in Spanish. Okay, a minute more here for the folks to respond in Spanish. I'm going to end the polling and share the results. And that concludes our second round of polling questions. Sorry, third round. Next slide, please.
Perry, do you want to take these last slides?
I did it. I kept myself muted. Sorry. Okay, so this is about wraps up our presentation. I want to just outline some of our upcoming schedule and where you can get more information. So on the next slide is a time frame of what we are working with here in this project. Our intermediate goal right now is to put together or submit the preliminary management zone proposal on March 8th, 2021 to the Regional Water Board. On the top line, you can see we've had first set of community meetings in November and this set in December. And then in late January, early February, we're going to be distributing the preliminary plans, a draft of these management plans and early action plans, where we'll be seeking input from the community. And then shortly after those are released, and again, those of you on the email will be noticed about that, we'll have another community meeting and begin taking input on those documents in person. And then the stakeholders have a similar timeline. We've had a couple of meetings with them so far, and then expect to have another stakeholder meeting in meeting 3, or third meeting in February once that draft plan is released. And then the next schedule is where the implementation activities will occur. Again, we expect that plan submitted March 8th, and then we begin implementing that early action plan late spring. And in that period, we'll be getting public and regional board review on the plan that we submit in March. And then our well testing, we expect to have available late fall, probably in the September timeframe. And then we'll be seeing water deliveries begin probably about a year from now, maybe early November or so. We should have either our water deliveries in place or the installation of the fill stations. Then across the bottom, you can see that we also have additional final management zone proposals that we put forward to the regional board, and then probably in 2021, a long-term plan for the permanent drinking water solutions. So on the next slide, we can show you where, again, our website, and I didn't mention earlier, but any of the past meeting presentations are available. This one will be posted as well. So if you have folks that you know that weren't able to make it tonight or yesterday, then they can go online and review these presentations. Welcome emails to myself. You can see my email there. And we will be having our final, at least before the plan is submitted, February community outreach meeting. And depending on the comments, we may have an additional meeting, but we're looking at February to be our next community outreach meeting. And again, the announcement will be sent out through that list that we've developed. And if you have your name on there, you will get those announcements. So our final set of questions, opportunity here. If anybody has any questions that they want to pose, please go to the Q&A and type those out. And we'd be happy to answer those. And I'm looking at my screen. I'm not seeing any. And in the chat. Well, appreciate you coming to this meeting tonight, virtually coming to this meeting, and hopefully help explain our program and understand what we're going to be working on in the next several months. So again, thank you very much for attending tonight.